Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thanks for coming. What's interesting is Dan and I put this presentation together, and we were really excited about it. And I feel like all those presenters just kind of stole their thunder a little bit. So you're going to hear a little bit of stuff duplicated, but I think Dan and I are going to maybe put a little bit of different perspective on it and give you some ideas that hopefully you can take away from here based on some of the information that you've heard. So I'm Nancy Mehlberg. I'm a principal at SBA. I work in a group called our Management Advisory Services Group. We do a lot of special projects, transactional work, consultative work. That's kind of the approach that I'm going to take to this. And Dan, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Sure. So I'm Dan Golomsky. I'm with SBA as well. I'm one of the principals. I head up our firm's valuation and litigation practice, and I do a lot of M&A transactions, as well as I'm part of our tax service line. So kind of multidisciplined from that perspective, spent a lot of time with clients on a lot of these topics, and kind of excited to talk about it. I do think the people that presented today are going to give you kind of some backstory here, and then we'll try to give you some what we think might be applicable to start thinking about from the business sector, individual companies on a whole. So we look forward to this. And, if you got questions at the end or whatever, feel free to confess this on.
We're going to talk about what uncertainty looks like. Tina's going to go through navigating some of the complexities of some of the changes that we have, the regulatory tax changes, things coming up. Then I'm going to just touch briefly on AI. I know you just heard a lot about AI. I do have a little bit of a demo. If we have time, we might go through it, but just kind of give companies an idea on where they start with AI. So with that, we're going to get started. So really, what is financial uncertainty? You know, I really want to make sure that people understand what it is, they plan for it. Part of the planning is going to be budgeting and forecasting, and they lead through it, lead your company through it, communicate it to your employees. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these. So the first thing is the uncertainty. So really, what is it? It's things like supply chain disruption, changes in consumer spending. I'm going to kind of throw in like the housing market a little bit through here because I think this is a big area right now that people are seeing change. You know, what is changes in consumer spending related to the housing market? People aren't selling their houses. Why? You're going to see in my next slide, source, interest rates. So there's a lot of things that you're going to see in this financial uncertainty that have a cause and effect. People have probably heard of the butterfly effect. What happens 1,000 miles away, the cause of that could affect me here. We're going to talk a little bit about that.
But I mean, we're seeing it all today, right? I mean, every time you watch the news, right? There's a new thing about tariffs, immigration, interest rates. All these things are uncertainties, and what we want to kind of communicate is, you know, kind of how we view these things and how we approach them.
So what caused these uncertainties? Here's just a sample of some of the causes. And what's interesting is I was putting this together, I actually walked in Dan's office and said, oh boy, we are actually living this right now. Like, we are in the middle of this. There's economic booms, and then there's talk about a recession. There's market volatility and the interest rates, commodity prices. Again, I'm going to go with home builders. People have heard lumber's up, lumber's down, steel's up, steel's down. There's this volatility in the commodity prices. Global events, natural disasters. Again, they don't have to happen here. I had a client that 2 years ago had major supply chain disruption. Not because of COVID, we were post-COVID. It happened to be the ice storms in Texas. Because a small part of what they distributed, they packaged it in something made in Texas. This put them so far behind in their supply chain. So we really need to focus on what's happening in natural disasters. Everybody lived through the pandemic. Don't have to talk about that. Hopefully we won't have another one. Geopolitical conflicts, which we're hearing about a lot now. And then the regulatory changes that Dan's going to talk about next. So what can we do? we have this uncertainty in our business. What can we do as business owners? So I'm going to give you some planning and some strategies. First thing is evaluate your risks. Evaluate your internal risks and your external risks. Where does my company have a risk if any of those events happen? Know what that risk is. Again, it could be operational insufficiencies, it could be new competitors coming into your market, it could be supply chain disruption. Know what it is. Diversify. Everybody says you should diversify your stock portfolio. Should you diversify your revenue stream? If this happens, should I be doing this? Kind of looking at, again, I'm going to go back to a home builder. If the construction of new homes has slowed down because people aren't selling their existing homes, what are they doing? They're remodeling. Should we get into the remodeling industry? Because now all of a sudden we're diversifying. If this happens, we still have this. Look at your business and determine, do you have that? Can you do that? Can you expand your customer base?
So Nancy, so A.O. Smith did that, right? They keep evolving and stuff like that, looking for opportunities. So as a business owner or being part of a business, right, you always look for that opportunity. What's changing in your environment? Where does it position? What does the foresight look like? And where do you want to maybe position yourself? How are you going to have to develop staff? How are you going to have to invest in products and stuff like that? These are the things you want to get on in a changing environment of uncertainty, right? There's no stability here. There's, I think, opportunities, right? You say 2025 looks like it could be pretty good. It might be the opportunity to capitalize on some of those things.
And, one of the things that I'm not an economist, but I have followed a certain economist who has really had some doom and gloom around 2030, if any of you follow that same economist. But what he has always said is, as bad as it's going to get, there's going to be companies who are set to capitalize on that. It's going to be miserable for 80% of people, but the 20% that have planned for it are going to thrive. So it's really, again, that being prepared and giving yourself time to prepare. So one of the other things is build your cash reserve. You got to have a safety net. I always say have 6 months of operating expenses if anything happens. Have a line of credit ready. I know people don't like debt, but I think it's important to have that ability if you need to draw on a line of credit, to have a line of credit available if you need it. So really take a look at that. Cost management. I'm sure your accountants tell you this all the time, because we do. Look at your costs. Review everything. Identify where you can save without hurting the business. Look at your gross profit margin. Can you increase your profit margins without having to increase your sales? Can you squeeze some of those costs somewhere without affecting the impact of your business? You should be looking at this as business owners all the time. And then be prepared to eliminate if you do have some unnecessary costs. Don't drag it out and think, well, I'm going to give it another year, I'm going to reevaluate. If you know, I'm going to give you a little example. I like clothes, a lot of clothes in my closet. If I don't wear something in 6 months, it's gone. It goes to Goodwill. Now I've said, okay, for every new piece I buy, I have to get rid of a piece. Because I don't want to be sitting with all this unnecessary stuff. So kind of look at your business that way.
I would say you look at it from a, kind of what's the plan, right? If I keep carrying that cost, what's my return going to be on that cost? And so if you're in that situation, you want to look at where can this potentially go? And we look at it from if we have a business and we have a bunch of losses and accumulated losses over years, and it's like, boy, you really got to nail it in the next couple of years for this business to survive. How are we going to get there from that perspective? So you don't want to dig yourself into that hole, but I think it's important to do that. We'll talk about the tariffs, we'll talk about immigration and stuff like that, but all those costs are something you're going to want to be able to identify.
And again, as you're going to see when Dan talks a little bit about the tariffs, and they alluded to this a little bit earlier too, like immigration, that's going to have an impact on probably the cost of labor. So although it might not directly impact you, you don't know that it's not going to impact the subcontractor that you use. So now all of a sudden your costs are going to go up. So you really want to have a handle on that. Strengthen your supply relationships. You know, I've heard people say for years, get out of China. Probably don't want to be in China. Just make sure that you have some backups in your suppliers. Don't be put in a situation where you can't get your product, or overnight your product goes up 100% in cost. And you're going to need to react pretty quickly if that happens. But I always tell people, don't put all your eggs in one basket. You want to have a strong relationship with your suppliers, but don't put all your eggs in that basket. Make sure you have a backup. You know, when we think about football, there's a reason we have backup quarterbacks. They're sitting on the bench just in case the quarterback gets hurt. They need to be ready to go in, and you want to do the same thing with your suppliers. And then invest in technology. So again, I'm going to touch briefly on this at the end. You know, there is so much technology available. I hope I have time to give you a very quick demo of a piece that we use. But automate where you can. I was talking to Dan a little bit about this before the presentation, and I do agree with a little bit of what the AI expert said there. That I think it's going to be a little bit slower. I don't think it's going to replace as many jobs as we think it will. Dan and I have talked often that we do believe that AI still requires some human thought. You know, we have judgment, AI doesn't have judgment, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then use data analytics. There are all kinds of tools out there, Power BI, and we're going to see that in the technology piece, to be able to analyze your data really quickly. So one of the first things you can do is set a budget. So does everybody know the difference between a budget and a pro forma? So a budget is something that you set, hopefully before the beginning of the year. You don't change a budget. A budget is what you hope to do. A pro forma is what I think is going to happen based on the current conditions. A pro forma can change multiple times throughout the year. A budget does not. Excuse me. Set a budget, compare your budget to actual every single month, and make sure that you know where your variances are. Really keep an eye on those budgets. I cringe when people say they don't have a budget.
And timely look at them, right?
Yeah.
You don't create a budget and look at it in 6 months, right? You want to be watching it on whatever frequency that you can make a change. The biggest thing about uncertainty is trend watching. And the more trends you can watch, the more predictive you can be of the future and what levers you have to pull and focus on. So we find these tools very useful from a client perspective, but it also gives us some thought as far as direction and focus.
Indeed, you use that a lot in valuations.
Yes.
You look at 5 years, look at trends over those 5 years. So
Yeah, from a valuation perspective, right? A valuation is a forward-looking analysis, okay? But we use historical trends to try to predict that future. In the event we know what the future might look like, which I don't know how we do, right? But the reality of it is, it's that's how valuations are determined, right? And you see these companies selling for a lot of money when they're only generating a loss or no revenue. Well, it's because it's future looking. It's what they're going to do in the future with that technology and so forth. We want to position companies in the same space.
So forecasting. This is where you want to have a forecast. And you want to have multiple scenarios in your forecast. You want to have a forecast that has different assumptions, and some are going to have best case scenarios, some are going to have worst case scenarios. Again, your forecast changes, your budget does not. So if I'm in June, how do I expect to finish the rest of the year based on my numbers in June? What is that going to look like? So you can forecast and you can make changes quickly if necessary. And then you want to create a contingency plan. That's basically, again, if this happens, then I'm going to do this. I recently have been talking to a client who has a couple of businesses, and one of them hasn't done well for several years. And I said, okay, we're done. We need a contingency plan. We're going to need to set a stake in the ground pick a date, 12/31 this year, 12/31 next year, whatever the date is. Put a plan in place. If you don't hit that, we have to pull the plug on it. You have to have that contingency plan. Otherwise, you're just going to keep going. You know, you want to stop the bleeding if there is bleeding. And then good leadership. This is really about communicating with the rest of the company and leading the rest of the company in uncertainty. One of the most important things is communicating to your employees. Communicate things that the company is doing. You know, I'm not saying that you have to be completely transparent on financials. A lot of people are not comfortable with that. Maybe with your leadership team you need to be. But communicate with the employees on what's going on within the company. If you're going to invest in AI, let the rest of the company know that. Really lead them through any uncertainty so you don't have employees thinking, oh my gosh, the company's doing horrible, I'm going to lose my job. You want to create a team. And the way you're going to do that is you're going to communicate through your leadership. And then communicate to any stakeholders. Those could be banks that you have debt, investors, suppliers. You know, if you are running into any issues, communicate with them and tell them what your plan is to change it.
And I think you communicate vision, right? By the more communication you do have and the more involved you include people, they start to understand your vision with you and can walk the same path. So I find that extremely important from that perspective. But again, we share the matrices that make sense and people control, right? We don't share information that somebody doesn't control because it's meaningless to them. We want some impact and have them work on that.
And there's tools out there, and this is hopefully something that I can show you guys later that has some AI built into it. But these budgets and performas, you know, they can really give you a good idea and an indication if you can make some minor changes, how that could impact. And one of them is something as simple as your AR. How quickly are you collecting your AR? I'm going to show you an example of how if you just move that slide a little bit, how it changes all the cash flow. So now you know you need to focus on collections if that's an issue. So we're going to give you some ideas and show you some tools that you can use to help you create these things. So really in the end, it's really about being proactive, creating your plan, keeping others informed, and being agile. Being ready to make changes. To Dan's point, if you're looking at your budget 5 months later, too late. You've already missed the ballpark. You need to be in there right away and be able to make quick changes. So with that, I'm going to let Dan. Do you want me to?
Yeah, so we'll go through this pretty quick because some of it, you know, the stuff we already shared, but we want to take this opportunity to call it self-plug to some degree. We'll move on to the first one, which is, so I don't know if anybody's heard about the Corporate Transparency Act or this beneficial owner interest reporting. It's a thing that passed in the 2021 Act, and it was really kind of to help the government collect information. But what it's done is it's put a compliance requirement on small businesses. And so go next slide. So the key objective of the Corporate Transparency Act is to increase transparency of ownership. So many organizations or LLCs are created and people don't necessarily know who owners are and so forth. The government wanted to eliminate that. Misuse of shell companies for legal purposes, drug trafficking or whatever the case would be, help law enforcement get to the people that they're looking for, and then to protect financial abuse, moving of money and that type of thing. So that's really what the objective was. Next slide.
And I do think, believe it or not, the U.S. is one of the only countries that doesn't do this. So there are a lot of other countries that are tracking this, and I know that, you know, I've heard of a lot of negative connotations around it, and people say, oh, they're just spying on me, and I don't think that's the intent of it. I do think that the intent of it is to help with money laundering, criminal activity in our country.
Yeah, but with that being said, right, if I'm a criminal or I don't want to follow the rules, am I really going to submit this information, right? So I think what they're going to collect is all the good people and the bad people still are unknown. But nonetheless, this is a compliance thing that's currently in law. It's in law, but the enforcement is on hold. But if you are a company with less than 20 employees, if your company has 5 million or less in revenue, and you're physically located in the United States, that business entity is technically required to register with the FinCEN. Things that are collected in this information is the legal entity, the business address, the word jurisdiction it's formed, the federal ID number. Where the rubber meets the road is this beneficial owner. It can be CFOs, it can be anybody that has check signing authority, it can be owners of 20% or more, but all these individuals have to produce their legal name, the birth date, and then they have to produce a driver's license, passport, and stuff like that. So it starts becoming a little bit intrusive from that information reporting. The due date is for businesses formed in 24, you're supposed to register your business within 30 days. The next is business formed prior to 2024. Those were all due January 1st of 2025, right?
But don't panic.
Don't panic, right? Next slide. So the enforcement of this is currently with the U.S. Supreme Court. So the U.S. There's two constitutional objections to this rule. One, the Fifth Amendment, unreasonable search and seizure, and producing all this information, is the government really entitled to that information? So that's one constitutional challenge, and the second one is they're imposing a federal rule that may be managed by the state level. So they're arguing the 10th Amendment. So currently it sits with the Supreme Court. Arguments were issued January 10th, and the Supreme Court has not come up with this opinion as far as lifting the injunction that's currently in place.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but haven't they said that if they have to talk, like the next time they get together to talk is March?
Yeah.
So we might not see any change until March on this.
And the other thing is Donald Trump, in his first presidency, is when this thing came into the rules, he actually vetoed it, but it was overturned, his veto was. So he's not a fan of it. So we'll see what happens from that perspective. So what do? Action requirements, right? So you can voluntarily register and just say, I'm done with that, I'm just going to provide my information, I don't care. Or you hold until this, the court makes some kind of determination. But I think there's, I do think we're going to see this at some point in time. It may walk back some of the information you need to share. Okay, but I would suspect that there's going to be some kind of reporting requirement at some point in time.
And this is a one-time filing. It's not something you have to do every year. You're only going to do it.
It's a one-time filing, but
unless
if you
there's change
your address, you change your name, whatever it is, you have to update that form within 30 days.
So there is, and maybe you have this, there is something called a FinCEN ID that I would recommend everybody get, because then you can just change on your FinCEN ID and it'll update any of them that you're an owner in the BOI reporting. Very easy to get. To Dan's point, you just need your driver's license, name, address. Very easy.
Yeah, so go back to the beneficial owner slide or whatever the case. One more back. More. All right. So this beneficial owner, like Nancy was saying, each beneficial owner can apply for their own FinCEN ID number, and that allows the business to just register and then put that FinCEN ID in, and it prevents this business from having to collect everybody's driver's license and so forth. So we have all our clients that do this, get a FinCEN ID, and then if they individually have to change their information, they just update that versus having the corporation to go through and make those changes for them.
And then it does put a little bit of responsibility on the individual and on the business. Again,
right.
Trying to lessen the pressure on the business.
All right, so real quickly hit the tax extenders, because I think it's one thing that's an uncertainty from our perspective. Long story short is we expect from a tax perspective that the tax rules we kind of have today are probably something that are going to continue. Right now, after 2025, the current rules are expected to transfer back to what 2017 was. So if there were no government changes, right, we revert back. We have higher tax rates. We lose some qualified business income deduction. We go up in tax rates. Our lifetime exemption for estate planning goes down, but we do get some state tax deductions on our Schedule A. So these are some of the things that are set to revert back. I don't expect that to be the case. I expect the current administration to get those things and carry those extensions through in some variation.
And just so everybody understands like what this is that capping on your Schedule A, the state tax at 10,000. That's what we're referring to here. Where you used to be able to put all of your state taxes on that line, now it's all capped at 10. And there's ways businesses can get around it, but that's what we're referring to there.
So we do, what I say it potentially looks like is I believe bonus depreciation probably comes back, and bonus depreciation is your ability to write off 100%. Right now it's at like 60%, so we expect that to kind of go back up. There's an R&D expense treatment. Don't want to go too big in detail on this, but basically people would get an R&D credit. They get the credit, but those expenses that generated that credit, they have to amortize over 5 years. So what you ended up with is a business could spend $1 million on R&D expense, get a $100,000 credit, but have to pay more taxes because that $1 million was spread over a 5-year period, right? So we're seeing a lot of tax consequences of that. There's been a number of legislative challenges trying to change that. That has failed at this point, but nonetheless. We also look at a potential increase in the SALT limit. So right now it's at 10,000, maybe it goes up to 20. Gives some people a big room, but the states that have high tax rates that want to say, hey, we're kind of being harmed in this process, but we're kind of living through that. We're going to extend the 20% business deduction and potentially go to a Schedule C, the C corporations. And that benefit is, right now the corporate tax rate's 21%. If you have a C corporation, that could take your effective tax rate down to 15%, which might almost make it a more opportunity for that type of tax structure versus an S corp or a partnership or anything like that. So we're looking at changes of that nature flowing through. And then we expect the lifetime extension to kind of continue at that, let's say, $13 million per person. So actions here, I would stay informed. It's uncertain from this perspective, but I kind of do expect this to happen. But that does cost us $3 trillion, right?
So where are they going to get it from?
Right. And Elon Musk, I think, said his initiative of trimming down the government was going to be a 500 billion, right? So it just wasn't going to cut it, right? But that's over a 10-year period, but nonetheless, it's still consequential. All right, so the other things I want to hit upon is tariffs. So right now there's no tariff actions that we have, but this is what Trump's promised in his campaign, and he's recently spoken on the 25% to Canada and Mexico, and he said he's going to have it effective February 1st. He said he was going to have it effective February 1st, but he's commissioned the government to look at the cost of that tariff, and that wouldn't be done until April 1st. Right? So I'm not sure how that timing necessarily works, but that was his speech. I do think we're going to see some tariff action. I just can't, it's a big leverage and negotiation point, but I feel like he's going to have to do it may be short-lived. But the biggest part of this is understanding what those tariff costs are going to be to your supply chain, and understanding, right, there's the movement from China to India and so forth. Sometimes it might require acquiring, you can advance to the next slide. So we have monetary administration, right, which is going to be in the news all the time. But we look for alternative supplies, we look for lead time, we look for inventory levels and cash flow planning, and that's very important because if you see tariffs potentially going up, I don't know if I'd overly react to it, but you might want to consider, kind of watching that inventory level, whether sometimes inventory, cost of lumber is way up here. You don't necessarily want to buy a lot of it at that way up here, but you want to make sure you have enough in the process. And so there's a big balancing act from that perspective, but it's understanding what that cash flow needs are and how you can flow it.
And one of the things I just want to caution people on, because I see this a lot in like manufacturing and distribution, if the market reacts and prices go up, So you're gonna follow the industry and you're gonna increase your prices. If you still have a fair amount of inventory sitting in your inventory at a lower cost, your margins are gonna look inflated. It's temporary. Because as soon as those higher cost products get into your warehouse or get into your manufacturing line, then you're gonna start to see your gross profit go down because your cost of goods is gonna go up. So I think people just need to be aware of this again in that planning and understanding that if you immediately raise prices, but you have inventory sitting in your warehouse at a lower cost, it's gonna be a couple months maybe, depending on what your inventory turn is, where your margins look really good. It's not permanent. Just be aware of that.
So last piece I'm going to touch upon is immigration. Two of these have already been crossed off, right? So we got the birthright citizenship and then the border security, right? Those are already executive orders, whether they, don't get challenged or not. But some of the other immigration proposals by Trump have been mass deportation, restriction on asylum, and eliminate illegal immigration pathways. So next slide on this one. So what I do predict in this, and we're seeing in a lot of M&A transactions where buyers kind of expect like e-verification of employment, right? So if you're looking at potentially selling your business at some point in time, make sure you got a good workforce, because I just recently had a transaction where we were ready to close. They said, okay, I need all the e-identification cards and so forth. Well, the transaction still hasn't closed, right? So the reality of it is it's becoming increasingly sensitive as a result of the administration, but the e-verification is going to be, I think, something that we're going to see more of, and then additional funding for the border security.
I do think this is going to affect wages. So again, maybe not you directly, but somewhere down in your chain, I think it's going to happen. So I think, again, people need to plan for that.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're in the food, if you're in the
Hospitality,
right, also your food costs are going to go up. If you're in something that requires that utilization of that labor, there's going to be either a supply issue, a cost issue, and so forth. Just kind of keep your pulse on those types of things from that perspective. But I would monitor this action as well, and I do think that you should plan for some increased costs. And I think when we talk about budget or the prospectus, I would build those things in. If they don't happen, great, right? That's a windfall to the organization. But you want to make sure the organization can handle those costs. And where does your pricing or your revenue have to be in order to cover those additional costs, right? So don't underestimate that impact. There's also people out there saying that it's not going to have an impact, it just can't. But I think it will.
I think it will too. Dan, one of the things that I wanted to ask you back on the tariffs, I have a lot of clients that utilize services in other countries. Is there some talk, I had heard there was, on tariffs affecting services performed in other countries and not just products?
Yeah. So I think, right, we're always looking for a competitive advantage or kind of protect the U.S. activity. So we have a lot of activity in India. We have a lot of sourcing in the Philippines, right? And these things are taking away opportunities for people in the United States. And it's possible that Trump could say, I want to stop that, right? I don't think he wants India as an enemy, and I don't think he wants the Philippines, right? So I think it's a little bit different, but I do think it's something we got to watch from that perspective. Probably in the second tier of tariffs.
Okay, so really quickly, I'm going to talk just a little bit about embracing digital intelligence and AI. So, how many of you have used any of these products on the screen? Okay, yeah, that's good. There are so many of them, like even Alexa, when you think about it, how long has Alexa been around? Alexa really is an example of AI. And how many times have you been talking at home with your spouse about something, and all of a sudden on your Facebook, totally different, computer, you start getting ads for what you were talking about. That is all part of AI. So it's no, bug the government doesn't have in our Alexa. It's all part of AI. So how can businesses use AI? So the customer service. I don't know if any of you have bought a car, but I bought a new car last year and I got so annoyed by every time I went to a dealer and the little person popped up and said, "Hi, my name is so-and-so, how can I help you?" And every question I asked, she didn't know. But I think it's the first attempt at how we can help these little chat boxes or support, how we can help the customer service side of it. So the supply chain management, I think this is going to be important because I think this can analyze large groups of data and it can start to tell you where there could be potential risks. There could be some problems. I was actually playing around yesterday with Microsoft Copilot in Excel, and I created a table and I put some percentages in and I asked it to identify anomalies in it, and it immediately came back and gave me a cell. And I was like, wow, that's pretty cool that it can tell me that here's the trends in my spreadsheet, but look at this cell, something happened here. So this is where I think it can start to help companies.
So a lot of times we have clients that have this inventory, right? And when they do, the inventory says that here's all the inventory we have, and then we go do a physical count at the end of the year, and all of a sudden we don't have all these things that we thought we had, right? We believe that AI is going to be a big player in that particular identification. So maybe when you get to the end of the year, you don't have those surprises, but I think it's something that is going to continue to improve.
And that's part of the data analytics. Again, I think it's important that everybody try to find some tool that's going to help with the data analytics. We use a lot of Power BI in our office. You can write a lot of stuff through Power BI. But I think this, as they indicated out there, I don't know that it's going to replace people, but I do think what it's going to do is it's going to make people more efficient in what they do. I think you're going to be able to get more work done in a smaller amount of time, and I think that's going to be the key. Again, I talked about sales and marketing. It's listening to you, and it's noticing things you're searching for, and then it's giving you those ads for those. And then in human resources, I think this is going to be an important tool because I think it's going to be able to screen resumes. If you have criteria on what you're looking for, it doesn't require a person to now go through and read that resume. It can immediately filter out people that don't meet your criteria.
I'm going to give you guys an example of, so I do litigation and I do expert testimony and I'll be deposed. And then what I'll do is I'll also get depositions from other experts. Well, one of the depositions I got recently was read by AI first. And it listed all the things that the person maybe didn't identify, questions that, how they responded, kind of did the person, support their claim and stuff like that. So it asked all these questions and kind of gave that feedback to the attorney. So what it does is it takes an attorney that's very strategic, right? They know all those things and they walked out of the deposition knowing that, but it's going to take an attorney that's not as good and it's going to elevate them. Okay, so what it does, AI will elevate people, and it just is going to require you to be, if you're not up here, right, use that AI, get yourself up there, and then grow from there.
So again, the manufacturing, I think the other thing that it's going to be able to do is it's going to be able to predict when equipment is going to malfunction. Based on the use of that equipment, the monitoring of it, I think it's going to be great in the manufacturing. I know in healthcare, there's been a lot of talk about healthcare. I had recently met with someone that was creating an application that would take people that had like a heart attack and it would scan all of their medical history for everyone and put it in this huge database, and they would track the medication. So it would track all the medication that had been given to people, and then it could take all that information and summarize what is the best medication to give this person with these symptoms or these issues. So I think in the healthcare field it's going to be used well. Fraud and security, again, our bank does that now. How many times have you been on vacation and used your credit card and all of a sudden the bank calls and says, "Why are you charging something in Mexico?" Yeah, it's me, I'm here. So that's already happening. And then financial analysis. This is the budgeting and the forecast that I told you about that can kind of make it a little bit easier for people to be able to create these budgets and these forecasts and analyze the data. So if we have time, it's really tight. I think what I'd like to do is let's go through this first. So how do companies get started with AI? I think the first thing you need to do is determine how it can help your company. How can it help your industry? How can it help your company? Honestly, you could go to ChatGPT and type it in, and it will tell you. It will tell you how it can help.
But I think the very important start here is if you don't have somebody in your organization that is tasked with AI, you need to get somebody in place first and foremost, right? Because this doesn't start unless somebody's going to take the initiative and follow that through. So I think that's number one baseline.
So you also need to look at your data that you're going to use. So figure out how it's going to help. Look at your data and make sure your data's cleansed and it's good data. Then to Dan's point, make sure you have a team in place, somebody that can embrace that. You want to evaluate the products and pick the right product that you're going to use. Start with small projects in your organization. Don't try to take on everything right away. Take something very small. And then you want to monitor it and impact it while you're encouraging innovation in your company. You know, we recently told our staff to play around with ChatGPT. I mean, you have to put guidelines in place. You have to set rules and guidelines for employees, and you have to monitor those. But let them play around with it. Microsoft Copilot, anybody using that? I've been really impressed. I wasn't the first day because I didn't know what I was doing, but once I figured it out, I was like, wow, this is awesome. So monitor the impact. How much time is it saving? You know, really look at that.
But keep in mind, once you upload your company data or whatever it is, right? You can't
do that in
ChatGPT, right? You gotta be.
Yeah.
So the guidelines are extremely important. Our organization is very like no client data, right? Everything has to be redacted or whatever the case would be. But you can take a white paper and you can download it into ChatGPT and you can say summarize this for me, and it can take a 30-page document and give you some pointers. But it's just leveraging that tool to help you make it work.
And that's why I will say Microsoft Copilot, it's using your worksheets and your data. It's not, you're not getting it out, on the web. It's using it within that platform.
Yeah,
so
the engine's inside the program.
I think it's a little bit more secure. So really, I think with AI, just like what everybody talked about out there, it's just embracing it, figuring out ways that you can use it and embrace it. Don't be afraid of it. I don't think it's going to replace people. It's going to hopefully make them more efficient. But I think as we continue, as that individual said, he thought we were kind of at the maximum. The data's at the maximum. Well, I think there's so many people that have just touched the surface of the capability of it. Although itself it might be maxed out, we're probably only used 1% of it, the normal person. So I think we need to figure out how we can take advantage of it.
And know how it fits into your workspace, right? I mean, it's about, AI can collect your, AI is a doer, right? And it's not a strategist, it's not a decision maker, and these types of things. So you gotta use AI for what it's for, and it's a doer. And so the judgment, the strategies, all those things are where you play. The reality of it is, if you got a bunch of people in your organization that are doers, right, that's probably a short-lived career. You have to train them to be the decision makers, the judgment people, the strategists. So you have to kind of maybe retrain how you go about your internal staff.
So here's just at work pastime, so if anybody wants to go, otherwise I'm just going to show you really briefly. Here's an example of how I think AI can help in like a budget or a pro forma. So this is sample data. It's got old years on it, but I just want to show you how powerful something like this can be and how much more efficient it can be than having an individual build this. This uses an Excel platform with AI built into Excel. So I have actual numbers, I have budget numbers, and now I can go into these different scenarios. And if you just look, very quickly. If I say year over year, I think I can get my sales growth to 5%. Watch that number in the gross profit. It's going to instantly recalculate. Now, it didn't just recalculate that one number. It recalculated my EBITDA. It recalculated all the assumptions in my balance sheet. It recalculated my cash flow. It recalculated my equity for 5 years, like that. This would take somebody a while to build this. So, one of the things that's important to think about AI is when you use it is you still need someone who knows the business to understand where can I make some small impacts that have maybe a small impact that gives me big change. You have to be, and then how am I going to do that? It's easy to say 5% growth. Know what the outcome is, but then start to think about how can I do this? And start to plan and map that out. So this is just an example. You know, you can play around with this a number of different ways, compare it to the industry standards, and again, it's all instantaneous.
Okay, what's the judgment here, right? So
Yep.
Nancy could increase it 5% and the gross margin might change $10,000, right? Well, okay, if I raise it 10%, the gross margin changes another $5,000. Well, then I know I'm playing a volume sales game, and is that worth that? Or should I start looking at my costs and that type of stuff? So it requires an individual, as part of that decision tree, what levers am I pulling over here to make those changes that are going to impact the business? And then I can run it through the model and say, okay, let's test that out.
Cause and effect.
Yeah.
So again, this is just a sample. We can help people create these. If anybody needs it for lending, I know we work with a lot of people going for SBA loans and they want like a 5-year cash flow, balance sheet, income statement projection. These are the kind of tools that make it really easy to at least the template that the data comes.
I've done that before, I've walked around with it.
So that's all I have to share today. So if anybody has any questions,
We'll stick around for a bit and try to answer them, but appreciate you guys attending and hopefully found this useful.